coming up on the 3rd of November. I'll remind you.
First Tuesday in November.
Of November, yeah. So if you haven't already booked that, or anything, make sure that you have.
Only 2 people so far. Oh,
Is
3,
that all?
including me.
Oh, all right. Oh, okay.
Okay.
So if you want to come, please get in touch with Tony ASAP.
I shall stick it in the next newsletter, obviously.
Okay. And a couple of things just I'd like to flag up. Obviously we've got the AGM coming up in November? Yeah. December. I'm sure I've got it, it's too late now to go home soon. We feel on the committee that we would like some new blood on that committee if we could have it. And we have 1 or 2 new members, and we're not looking at anybody. And it would be really nice, you know, if we could persuade 1 or 2 people to come into the committee. There will be some officer posts up for grabs as well, I suspect, this year too. So anything that anybody feels they can do to help will be gratefully received. And there's something else I've forgotten that I was supposed to have said. Rob, where are you? Have I remembered everything? Okay, right. No, I've thought of something else. We had a reasonably successful trip to San Marlo this year, which most people seem to enjoy that went. And we're thinking about doing something else again next year, if that's what people feel they would like. Betty and I were bouncing a few ideas around, and one suggestion we had was the Channel Islands, and the logistics of that to iron out. But if anybody has got any other ideas, then will you let me know ASAP, because it takes a while to gather information and get it back to you and so on, get prices and things. And I don't know, maybe April time or something like that we were thinking of. And the Channel Islands came up because all things being equal, it's nice time for flowers over there at that time of year. But it's a thought, so that's on the agenda. Okay, well, we have Tony tonight, and very grateful we are to you, Tony, for doing this. And we always forget that we have a lot of expertise in this club, and Tony keeps it all hidden away and says he's very embarrassed about doing this talk tonight. And I said, I don't think you should be, because without people like Tony doing the things he's done in the past, I don't think any of us would be half as safe at sea. So I think we owe you that. So,
very indirectly.
Well, indirectly, well, all part of the game. So I'm sure it'll be really interesting. So I'm going to hand you over to Tony and let us get on then. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you very much. Yes, it is a bit embarrassing. I haven't sailed across the Atlantic or anything like that, or let alone the 4 legs of the Clipper race, which of course is taking it a bit further. But I have sailed. I did make a note somewhere. Yes, I've been sailing 69 years, and photography for 77 years, since I had my first camera. So, and the two to some extent go together. That was taken at Rutland by Ken, and I just added a title to it. And obviously straightened the horizon.
We've been measuring it.
No, I didn't bother to measure it, but there we go.
Well, it makes the angle of the boat more acute to see what's straight there.
Something like that, yes. And I'm screwing my nose up, I can see. Now, I was going to spend just 2 minutes, if I may, going back rather a long way. Now, this was before the war. Doug isn't here because he always says, did I mean the World War II or the War? But no, it was the, I don't know why it's showing a little bit of the other thing behind, but we won't worry about that. I was about 7, and this was before, and still at kindergarten school. And there came to pass a day when the whole of the class was told to go and draw something. And all the little kids went and drew Mummy's and Daddy's house, or the garden, or something like that, or their car, if they had one in those days. I drew the wiring diagram of a 1-valve radio. Which was correct, I can assure you. I used to build for fun. Put it down to my father because he was a ham radio enthusiast and actually spent a lot of the evenings during the war listening to Morse and writing it down, packing it off to some address unknown. I will guess it ended up at Bletchley, because a lot of these enthusiasts who could read Morse well, they were looking for spies that were within radio range and that sort of thing. Whether anything was, God alone knows. But so I think that was when I might have been called a geek or a nerd, I think, something like that. As a bit of personal background, before we get to the boaty bits, Nottingham University, degree in physics, maths and electronics, vice captain of the university rifle team, got my blue with a great gaudy blazer and a big gold badge. It looked very impressive, but we could strike matches at 25 yards. And then our first job was actually with EMI, and designing antennas for, as they are now called, and have been for years, for guided missiles, all of which came under the Official Secrets Act. And I went a couple of times to the rocket range at Aberporth, and that was quite interesting, because they did build a launch pad for the Skylark rocket. It was the only one that came under any secrecy at all. It used to be fired up practically vertically, about 100 miles, sampled the upper atmosphere, and then dropped where it felt like. And of course, when some of the what I call proper war missiles were being launched experimentally there, the farmers hadn't got much sense of humour if they landed in their fields, totally out of control. Aberporth, tiny little village, there was virtually nothing to do there, but a nice little beach, and halfway down the beach there was a pub, and while I was there I went down and into the bar, had a pint, that sort of thing, as one does, and there was a notice on the bar counter in Welsh, and I, despite being Welsh, don't speak a word, other than one or two rude ones, and apparently it was woodlouse racing on Tuesdays. And you went down into the cellar and picked your woodlouse, and then you used to race them across the bar counter.
They live it up in Wales.
Well, there isn't much else to do in Wales. I used to go out, but my father ended up being chairman of the lifeboat at Mumbles, and we lost all the crew and about 40 or 50 other crew members from the tanker in 1947. They all drowned in floating crude oil, and it was a terrible situation. But the replacement boat was a Watson design, and father, as they used to knock a Senhouse slip out. Some of you may not recognise the term Senhouse slip, but you just knocked it with a lump hammer, with the engines running on the boat, so that it cleared the slip when it hit the deck, hit the water, and it was quite fun. There she is. The props were turning, but the cameras stopped them. And I've been down there many a time like that. Last time, collar and tie, reefer jacket, just been to a wedding, and it was actually a shout. It's the only time I went on a real outing. But it gives you a good idea of what it's like on some of these boats when they launch them. There it is, a second or two later. And there we've got Swansea Docks, and just round here, Steel Company of Wales, and the bay from there down to here is about 3.5 miles. And the local club did quite a bit of sailing round the Cans, within the bay area, and of course the boats in those days, just about 1946, were all wooden, some of them gaff-rigged, some of them gunter. Some of you may not recognise gunter rigs, but it is one of the traditional means of having a short mast when the boats are left on swinging moorings. Right, what else have we got on there? That is really not very relevant, but that on the left there is where the lighthouse is off Mumbles Head. And this, about half a mile out, is the Mixon Sands, and it dries out. There have been a cricket match there. My mother there, That's the coxswain, the young in his day, young coxswain of the lifeboat, Lord Mayor of Swansea, coxswain's dad, and a few other members. He was one of the Coast Guards. But it was quite interesting that it did dry out to that extent. So, and you either went inside it, close inshore, if you were going down the Gower Peninsula, or you went right out. I mentioned the photography because we used to hold a lot of national dinghy championships down in Mumbles, down in the Bay area. And other than acting as a rescue boat, when I eventually had a Cornish crabber, I used to take lots of pictures, black and white, film in those days, of course, develop in large print, dry them, sell them in my parents' little tiny yacht chandlery the next day at something like £0.50 a throw, and it did help pay for my expensive lighting and tasting cameras. I used to cover weddings and things as well, but standing for local pros up in the Midlands when I moved there. Parents had a family motor cruiser, and I suppose, oh, that's the Sky. Not that one, it's the next shot, I think, but that is 7 miles out in the Bristol Channel. Last time I saw it was in Brittany, I think. Is it Brittany, or they've got a museum of floating old steam-driven craft? I think it is. It's either Brittany or Normandy. And one of the Scarweather lightships, I actually spotted it there. And we used to go out there occasionally. And one Christmas, we went out in the family motor cruiser, tied up alongside to take the, and another time at Christmas we went out in the lifeboat to take the local vicar out for say a few words, and apparently I fixed their television so they could probably watch Morecambe and Wise, something wrong with it. Kicked it hard or something like that. Now that's the family motor cruiser. God, doesn't it look dated? It was in fact a 33-foot lifeboat, I believe off the Mauritania, and my father paid £10 for the hull, and I suppose that was relatively a reasonable price before the war, and somebody did a bit of a design, and you could add a couple of cabins on it, and a Morris, ended up with a Morris Commodore 6-cylinder 3-litre engine, petrol engine, and that was it at full whack of about 7 knots, something like that. But of course they were very solidly built, and it was used as to pull in local yachts that broke a mast or that sort of thing, rather than drag the lifeboat down the slips and get it out, because you hadn't got the smaller lifeboats, obviously, again in those days. Very stable, dirty great prop with huge blades like dinner plates, and slow revving so that it really did grip the water. And it did sail downwind. Anything will sail downwind, won't it? And I used to climb the mast and do things as one does as a youngster. But that would have been taken, I think, probably about 1950, something like that. Right. I've written here, I've had to type some notes, and I'm sorry about that. I suppose the word headhunted is modern bull, but I was offered a job following the 18-foot national. We had a lot of 18-foot national class boats there, open boats, and one of the boats, the chairman of the class association, happened to be managing director of a company called Evershed Vignoles in Chiswick, well known for mega insulation testers and things like that. It had 3 sections, one of which was a naval division, and I was offered a job there, and which I took. So I left behind all the guided missiles and things, and went to work for Eversheds. And it also happened that the joint managing director, David Walker, was chairman of the well-known Walker Log Company. Thomas Walker and Son Limited. It goes back to 1838. When I got there, it looked like it. Overhead shafting, belt-driven lathes and drills and all the typical things. We did die casting, all sorts of things like that. And it had an industrial section where custom-built devices for measuring lengths of yarn for carpet manufacture and that sort of thing was done. So I brought along that device, which I made into a table lamp. Just for your interest, some of you will have used Walker logs. Doug's got one. I know that, much smaller spinner than that. There were 3 types of spinner, even going back a long time. That is as big as they come. It does 900 revolutions per nautical mile, turns a rope, turns a gearbox back on the back of the ship, and clocks the mileage. More recent versions, recent being relative, you could repeat those distances recorded in the chart house. Not part of the bridge in those days, the chart house, where you had charts and sextants and all that sort of navigational kit of the day. And that was what was used. And they were, in fact, a legal requirement in Scandinavia, even when I was with the company, that they had to carry a Walker log specifically. That was good for business. That was, I think, a dud one. They were all tank tested on the roof of the building, which was 1911, the building where I worked. We had a tank about 20 feet square and a great arm which swung round, and the number of revolutions against a standard sample, if it didn't comply within the required specification, then it would be put to one side and the blades tweaked a little bit. You did it again until it did the right number of revs between 0 and plus 2% of the correct mileage recording. The reason for the plus 2% was, and for the yacht versions, which are much smaller of course, was the fact that you thought you'd arrived somewhere before you did, and you didn't find yourself around the beach. That was the argument anyway, and it's not unreasonable in those days. I've got a street light to help me here.
Tweaking involved use of a big hammer, did it?
Not a big hammer, but literally slight bending. They're nominally flat blades, so they have a lot of slip. They're not shaped as you would with a propeller to drive a vessel along. I think I can manage without that. Smaller one, used by people like Francis Chichester. I only met him once. I'm ashamed to say I didn't recognise him. But he used to use the next smaller one, 1166.6 revolutions per nautical mile. Don't like one customer told me, which nautical mile are you considering? Well, now that's all very well, and it's true, of course, that the nautical mile has changed its length slightly to the current 1852 metres, which I think, if you do the sums, is 6,076 point something feet, as distinct from 6,080 or 6,082 over the years. So that was a silly thing to say. I think I've got some more pictures. Oh, that's a bit of bull. It's a letter I received from the RYA. As a member, I used to race the 12-foot national in London on the Thames, and I wasn't good at it. The wind always seemed to shift at the wrong moment for me. But when I moved to Birmingham, I bought a Merlin rocket. I became a Merlin rocket measurer for many years for the national championships and so on. But we were picked by the RYA to run the national team racing finals. Very, very cutthroat, of course. And in turn, the club picked me to be race officer for the day. And we went down to London and had to discuss it all in great detail. I managed to borrow, you didn't have VHF handhelds in those days, of course, and I managed to borrow from McAlpines, the business. They were one of our customers, believe it or not, nothing to do with marine stuff, but I designed anemometers, wind direction, transmission, that sort of thing, and they used to buy them for their tower cranes, so that if it was blowing a gale or unsafe to work, then everybody switched the cranes off, so to speak, and possibly turned the tower around and face the right way for the wind direction. I don't know. But I managed to borrow some handheld walkie-talkies. The only thing we didn't take into account, we had absolutely dense fog. You couldn't see any of the marks. Typical, isn't it? You know, I got it all organised. I had an accountant friend, all the race sheets. And it didn't clear till towards lunchtime, but we got it off all right, and as a result, they were kind enough to send me a sort of bit of bull letter. Now, these are interesting. That one, where you can see that the propeller bit spins from there down, turns gears in a gearbox to run those gas meter type hands, and a long line was attached there which didn't spin, and you had to pull the whole lot in if you wanted to know how far you'd travelled. One of the very first ones there was a guy called Massey, Edward Massey, in London, lived in London, who was mad keen on designing improved logs. But up till that period, most of them were pretty useless. They weren't, I don't know why. We had a museum full of these sort of things. But that one, there's the spinner, near enough the same as the one I brought along tonight, which turns the gearbox there. You've got a couple of brass plates, and to stop that trying to spin, and then a long line attached there. You still have to pull the thing in to read it. But I won't tell you about that one, because I've got some more pictures of it. Those are all variations of on a theme. But that truly was. He had, this chap Massey had, I think it was either an uncle or had an engineering business in Birmingham, and transferred the manufacture of them to the Birmingham company, back street near the bus depot, not far, walking distance from the bull ring. And that was one of them. Now, I'm going to go back. Come on. That one. Now, I had a letter we used to get because of people who went diving and came across wrecks, of course, and old Walker logs on the seabed. They're all numbered. They're stamped with the date of manufacture, and they used to have handwritten records in huge tomes kept in a safe. One of these big safes you could walk in. So we knew, and I could go back to about 1870 odd and tell you who actually assembled the log, who it was supplied to, etc. And therefore, when the divers found bits of log and so forth at a wreck, they would write to the company from all over the world and say, we've got this old Walker log and it's number 1234, can you tell us anything about it? And it came to pass that very often I handled these letters. And one day, a letter arrived, and it was either from the Royal, if there is one, the Royal New Zealand Yacht Club, or it may have been Royal Auckland, I don't know. But it had a touch of class about it, the way it was written. And they sent some black and white photographs, and said, you may be interested to know that we've actually tested this log. It still works, but it over-records seriously. And we had one hell of a laugh because it's actually a depth sounder, and what they thought was mines were phallums. that is a sample. Before, of course, any echo sounder, you had a lead weight, as you obviously do, and a long line, but instead of keeping the line taut when it hit the bottom and measuring the depth by marks on the line, you just let the line slack. And as this whizzed down to the bottom, there is a little propeller which was geared as it whistled down to the bottom to record the depth. And it was clocked up there on a couple of dials. When you pulled it in, you can't see it in the photograph, but there's a metal plate which, once you start pulling it in, drops and locks the paddle from unclocking on the way up what you clocked on the way down. But I had to write them a really nice, smooth letter, because they said, actually, they said, we've polished it all up and varnished it, and we've mounted it as a log trophy for our racing, you see. So I found that quite amusing. The Excelsior log, also going back to the late 1800s, those are slightly more modern, those are electric versions of it. They have a smaller spinner and electric cable, you can see. Some of these pictures are not very good. I've forgotten where I got them from. But, and it had a flywheel on there, and again, mechanically clocked the mileage, but the ones with electric cable, you could plug them in to a gas meter type set of fingers in the cockpit, or if it was on a bigger boat, wherever the navigation was done over a chart table, and clock that. And then smaller still, which is not a game that isn't a good picture, that was the last version of it. Doug has got one of those, so he tells me.
Sure enough.
That is the Knot Master, and you can see, as a matter of interest, same principle, it clamped on to one of those plates, which was bolted on the quarter, and you just open the front there, set the hands to naught, and off you went on your trip. And in the box, we always supplied enough log line, which is about 3 millimeters diameter, and a couple of the spinners. And I had one left, the spare one, because sharks used to take them occasionally. And be very indigestible, I guess, but never mind. And I had a letter from one customer who wanted to know how he should connect the second spinner. You do get it. Now, oh yes, I've got a couple of pics in a minute to show you. I used to do a lot of ship trials. Mostly brand new ships. Some of them were fleet auxiliary tankers. Some of them were these giant landing craft, which where the whole bows opened, of course, and they could run tanks at the shore and so on. And the wartime, you know, they served their purpose. And when on trials, it's quite interesting, I think. I think a lot of people who are what I call amateur sailors, in various degrees, of course, don't realise you've got no Ferodo brake linings on things like tankers. And even a 25,000-ton tanker, I was on trials on a BP-1 of about that size, up off the Clyde, and always on trials they do a crash stop. And a crash stop on about 15 or 16 miles an hour is about 20-25 minutes. So it does give you an appreciation that you can't, even on the modest tankers, you can't just get out of the way of somebody's yacht. But this is Grimsby docks, and that was a 46-foot Morgan Giles, wooden hull, 46-foot Morgan Giles Nanako cruiser, flat out about 20.5 knots. A couple of turbocharged and after-cooled diesels, Caterpillar diesels, and it was bought, I think it was probably in the late 60s, by the chairman of one of the biggest trawling companies for his summer holidays, and he wanted it taken to Cannes. And he didn't want the trawler skippers to take it because they'd bash hell out of them. And it was all very beautiful, as you'd expect. So our rep, who sold equipment to the trawlers and trawling companies, was asked to skipper a trip. I went as number 2 navigator and engineer. I knew nothing about diesels. But, you know, we had spares of everything under the sun, and we took it round the outside. It wasn't designed for it, it was a gin and tonic boat. But we couldn't run it at 20 knots, it burned too much fuel. So we used to run it at about 16 knots. And there was no way to get across the Bay of Biscay. We went from Grimsby to Hamble, refueled, across to Brest, refueled. He had 200-gallon tanks bolted on the side decks and sheathed in glass. And for crossing the bay from Brest to Coruña, we had 350-gallon drums of diesel as well. And as I say, we refueled at Hamble, then at Brest. It was interesting when we got towards northern Spain because we were getting a bit short of fuel. And of course in those days, no sat-nav, nothing like that. We towed one of our own Walker logs. We got a radar, you can see the antenna there. It came and used radar full of valves, and they were supposed to have got it all set up for the trip, but I found I had to retune it. You had to tune things with valves. They always used to drift about a bit in electronic terms. And there it is. I can't think where we got that taken, but it was on the way probably either out off Grimsby somewhere. But we went like that all the way to Cannes. Brest, Coruña, is it Lexios? I don't know how you pronounce it, northern Portugal, down to Lisbon, from Lisbon to Gib, turned left to Cape St Vincent. I did suggest we went between that little island at the off the point there, but it was calm, that was all right. Like, what used to be frightening was all the fishermen in little boats in the middle of the night, with either no lights or, you know, nothing much, and it would be very easy to carve them up. I expect some of you know that for yourself.
Yes.
And then into Gib, then we needed to fill all the oil tanks up again, and from there to get to the Balearics, and then refuel there, and the last leg was from, oh God, what's the place on the northeast corner of the where the seaplanes used to land? Quickly.
Mahon.
Sorry?
Mahon?
No, it wasn't Mahon. I can't remember now. But we refueled there from a horse and cart with tanks of diesel and hand pumps and things like that. And we had an absolutely flat, calm crossing the Med from Palenza, going across. So we just stopped, did a very foolish thing. We stopped the engines, and once the boat had stopped, touch astern, we all stripped off and dived into the Med, leaving the boat to drift. Well, it didn't go far, there was no wind, it was, you know, but we should have kept one person on board, I guess. In a long way to go with a mile of water under you. But it was an interesting trip. We burnt 5,000 gallons of diesel, 2,500 mile trip, and at the owner's expense, and in my case, the company's time. So that was a way to do it, I thought. And yeah. Right, I'm going to leave that bit of script of mine there. Yes, I've got it a little bit, I'm sorry, out of sequence, but not to worry. there we were in the middle of the bay. We did a sun sight, just I think it was probably a noon sight, just to see how we were doing. What was interesting was that when we were getting short of fuel, we could, lovely morning, sort of 5 o'clock in the morning, and see all the northern coastline. But as we were getting short of fuel, we weren't sure whether, on dead reckoning, we ought to turn left or right to get into Coruña. So some of you may remember the little direction finding radios that yachtsmen used to use. Some of them had what are known as ferrite rods, and you waved them around to minimise the signal to get a bearing, either from a magnetic compass mounted on top, or very often a thing called a beanie loop had a loop, a single loop like that. And if the radio was lined up fore and aft, you could swing this loop and sense the direction relative to the bow of the station you were listening to. Well, there weren't any direction finding beacons there, but there was in Lugo, inland, a console station. Now, I will stick my neck out here and say, I don't suppose any of you know console. You do you? You surprise me. It's been dead for years, years and years.
So does my
It's a station that sends a mix of dots and dashes, and you count 60, a total of 60, and you count the dots, and they gradually sound as though they change into dashes, and that gives you, using special overlaid charts, a bearing. We didn't have a console receiver, but I used the DF set to get a bearing, and then said, well, we're going to turn right. We turned right, and we got into Coruña and spent the morning out off a sewer outfall, which wasn't the best thing to do. Right. Now, in more modern times, this was the start of the Queen's Cup at Cowsweek, and the boat, an Ocean 71, had just won the Round Britain two-handed race with Robin Knox and a chap called Leslie Williams that I don't think one ever hears about now. I think he went off and got married and gave up sailing or something like that. But it was a running start, 3,000 square feet of spinnaker, and very light conditions, as you can see. But it was good fun. And amongst all the crew, it was all a bit of a jolly, we had Clement Freud. The boat had been stripped out, and I remember Clement Freud. I can't imitate, what is this thing, starboard tack? But he did cook risotto for 18 on 2 primer stoves, so that was all right. And we didn't actually finish the race, it was so light. And it came to pass a few days later that Leslie Williams was sailing, going to race that 30-foot yacht in the Seine Bay. And there we are, towing it across the channel. Same boat. And we had the helmsman, I don't remember who it was, doesn't matter, but he suddenly called out, he said, I've lost the steering. And 71-foot of boat, 30-foot boat on tow, and he could just spin the wheel and nothing happened. So I dashed down below and followed by Robin, and found what the problem was. All the steering was coupled mechanically with rods, with flanges, to get around the shape of the boat. And although it had just won the Round Britain race, the conditions must have been such that it shook half the bolts loose, so you had flanges sort of doing that, with one bolt left out of 4. So we went round the whole boat just with a couple of spanners, putting all the bolts back and tightening them up. And when we got to Alderney, which was as far as the bigger boat went, they cast me adrift in the one. They brought the smaller boat alongside and cast me adrift in it because it had a very peculiar little engine, a little 2-cylinder, 2-stroke. And I've been used to these, but what was peculiar about it was that it didn't have a gearbox of any sort. If you wanted to go astern, you stopped the engine, and it had two 12-volt batteries, one wide, one polarity, one way, the other way. So what you did was you stopped the engine, used a different battery to start it being turned over in the opposite direction, and then off it went astern. But you had to stop the engine each time and hope it fired. So anyway, they chucked me over the side to go off in the boat. Very trusting in a way. I've found this many times in my working life, that going to fix problems with something, wind direction equipment and so forth, over the years, that it was assumed by boat owners that I could actually take the helm. Now, they had no reason whatsoever to suppose I knew one end of a boat from the other, just because I could fix a hull-fitted log, or go up the mast and replace the anemometer cups or something like that. But it came to pass very, very regularly. And will you take the helm? Will you berth it? And there was one famous occasion when I refused to berth a twin-screw powerboat in the Hamble because I didn't think the bloke was sufficiently educated to deserve having a boat like that. I know, but I thought, bugger it, it was blowing a bit. And my ex-wife was with me at the time for some reason. And he couldn't get it in the berth. And I think it was actually one of the berths near the RAF Association, not far up the Hamble. And he tried it for one slot, where he should have been, and he made a right what's-it of it. So he sort of backed it out, and then he tried somebody else's slot, and somebody else's, and then he said, would you mind berthing it for me? I whispered to Val, my ex now, nothing to do with the sailing. And I said, I'm not going to berth it for him. If he can afford a nice twin-screw powerboat like this, for about 40-something foot, he can do it himself. And we went like this, chuntering down slots until we got to the car park, and he left it there, squashing some poor little 20-odd foot yacht against the sea wall, and fetched somebody from the marina to go and put it where it should have been. Well, I mean, it was silly, wasn't it?
Were you invited back again?
No, I never heard. He didn't know whether I could do it or not. But I think with twin screws, you ought to be able to get it in a slot. Now this, I had black hair in those days.
Was that you?
That's me. Italian blood, you see, the black hair. Sorry, I don't want too many. That's Edgbaston Reservoir with the water very, very low. And we sailed about 6 classes there and did pursuit racing or class racing. And there came to pass a time, we used to use 12-bore cannons to start the races, and flags, traditional 5-minute flag, 10-minute flag, and so on. And it got more and more difficult to get officers of the day who could do it properly, in accordance with the club's racing instructions. So I was asked to join this is very much me, isn't it? In the sense I keep talking about me, and I'm supposed to, I suppose.
That's what the topic is.
Hey?
That's what the topic is.
That's what the topic is, yeah. So anyway, they asked me if I'd join a sailing subcommittee to discuss the building of an automated starting system. And I said, no, I won't. I said, I will design one for you and write a specification for the sailing committee to consider. If they like it, I'll build it. So I did. And again, much to my ex-wife's disgust, with small children and some friends who we used to go down to Salcombe. And it was a fortnight when we had an awful lot of rain, so I had a very big pad of paper. And I spent most of that fortnight designing it. And although I won't go into it in any detail, each of those rows of bits there, looking at that panel, the whole thing was about that wide, with 7 classes. And you could start class racing with the correct intervals for the club, or up to 7 classes of pursuit racing, and I had with a soldering iron, I could alter the timing on what was called a diode matrix, bit of printed circuit board. I could alter the timing if the club decided that the intervals weren't correct. And I used if Harry was here, I was hoping to be here. Things called uniselectors. There they are. They're sort of rotary switches used by telephone exchanges many years ago. And I rang up GEC and said, will they stand switching 110 volt 60 watt lamps when they're only designed for speech signals? And they said they thought they would. So I made up a little test jig and I ran it every day I was in the office until I'd sort of burnt some contacts out. But in actual fact, I had somebody, I cut the panel out in aluminium, had it stone enamelled, nice mahogany case for it, and it worked lights. It worked lights above the starting box, equivalent to the 10 and 5 minute flags, and it also worked a gas-driven hooter instead of the local residents got a bit fed up with the cannons going off in Edgbaston there, because it's part of Edgbaston. You've got to say that with the right voice, haven't you, Edgbaston, you know. And it ran for 30 years without failing. So I must have done it right. And they were delighted, of course, so they made me an honorary life member of the club, which I still am. But they chucked it out now and decided they ought to have a computerised system, which is perfectly reasonable. One of the reasons I moved there, I went there from the London company on a month's trial and ended up staying 28 years and dragged them sort of screaming into the 20th century because shipping in the sort of 60s, 1960s, 70s, didn't want to pull logs behind them. If you wanted to go astern, of course that was the problem, and you push probes through the bottom. And motorised probes controlled from the bridge, so I used to design the electrics of that, because the probes obviously were in the bottom of the ships. All the big ships have double bottoms, and you can actually crawl around underneath the engine room flooring, floor plating. And we motor drove probes out about that far, about a couple of feet out from the bottom of the ships. And the first ones we did worked on what was called the Pitot principle, P-I-T-O-T, where you measured water pressure. And it's all right doing it on ships that don't have a big draft, but when you get onto the super tankers, 250,000 ton tankers, and that's 250,000 is the cargo capacity, weight. And if you're 70 or 80 feet underwater for the boat to float, the pressures you're dealing with don't lend themselves to measuring little pressures due to the movement of the boat through the ship through the water. And then we went over to what were called electromagnetic logs, where you project a magnetic field from a probe under the ship, which generates little electrical voltages, which you amplify and measure very accurately, and then you multiply by time to get your distance travelled. So all that, the electronics was down in the engine room, and the displays up in the bridge, and speed information was also sent to the radars. True motion radar, I think true motion has now become a bit like hoovers, and when you say a hoover you mean a vacuum cleaner. True motion was actually a trade name for Kelvin Hughes models, where instead of being the centre of the screen, the land stays still on your radar screen, and you and any other shipping on the move moves across the screen. So they had to get a feed from the log, albeit speed through the water, and then also, of course, they get a heading from a gyro compass, so that the picture, as I say, of the land near enough stays still, and it provided a very good indication, just as you get today with chart plotters. It's become so refined. We've all of us lived, not necessarily in the marine world, haven't we, through amazing technological changes in any walk of life. The other thing about these probes is the fact that the water underneath the ship and the yacht doesn't move at the same speed as the boat, due to what are called boundary layer conditions. If you go at the front of the engine room of a 250,000-ton tanker, to get a probe stuck out enough to measure the true speed of the boat, you'd have to stick out about 18 feet, which is not very practical. You can calculate it approximately. So you have to calibrate those, and even on yachts, you really, if you want a decent result from the log, forget GPS and things, then they've got to be calibrated over 100 miles back to life. Something up to about 20-25% is typical. I expect most of you have or sail with little paddle wheel logs these days. Any of you know when paddle wheel logs first appeared? No. Well, I'll tell you. In the reign of Augustus III, BC, a few years.
You was alive then too.
No, it wasn't me, but a chap called Vitruvius, a mechanician he was called, an engineer, he designed a paddle wheel log, and he had a paddle sticking out, a big paddle sticking out the side of the thing while all these people were running like hell. And at the inboard end, he used to drop stones into a bucket. And when you'd done 35.5 stones, you got there. That's fact. Now, I only put that in, as I say, because it did prove a great success. And it gave me something of interest to think about. That was one of the tankers. I was on trials. I tried to take a camera with me, but they don't mind. But now that, as I said, I used to race a 12-foot national. I was brought up with wooden gaffering boats and so forth down in Mumbles area, mainly. That was a new French-built BP tanker. And it was a modest one. I think it was about 60,000 tons, something, probably about 800 feet long. And the only reason I've got a picture there, I think I climbed the foremast while we were on trials in the English Channel, and took a picture. And it's on the midships bridge. There was an occasion, no names, no pack drill, when I was invited on a NOSCA boat, and I got the slight impression that it was doubted whether I could be safe to take the helm. There she is, and I said, I got bored. I said, can I ever go? To the captain, and we were somewhere off the Seine Bay, somewhere out there. And they said, yeah, if you like. So they let me take the helm for about 2 or 3 hours. I could hold about 1.5 degrees heading under those sort of conditions, something pretty calm. And then they said, now turn it round and we'll go the other way. So I said, would you like me to turn left or right? So I've forgotten which way we went, but I put 10 degrees of rudder on. And if you've ever seen that, which again, I doubt you've had the opportunity, but I used to go and sit and watch the rudder mechanism working. Huge hydraulic rams and things at the back of the boat on the rudder head. And I used to find it fascinating. But it had a proper steering wheel in those days, not these little tiny tillers. So I put about 10 degrees of rudder on, and when we got to about 40 degrees before the reciprocal course, I took it all off, all 10 degrees of it. And I still overshot the reciprocal. But I thought it was nice, and I thought it does show that it's a bit different from racing dinghies. As you'd expect, of course. It was in ballast, so I expect it was drawing about 60 odd feet, something like that, maybe a little more. I did a lot of silly trips. I think, again, it applies to a lot of engineering work. But before we had today's emails and all the rest of it, we had a telex. If anyone remembers telexes, I think some of you do, in the office, wanting an engineer to go to Augusta. Didn't say where it was. It turned out to be one of 3 Augustas in the Med. And in Sicily, eastern Sicily. So I packed a bag and some overalls and dirty shoes, which I always had to take, and drove down to the back of Earl's Court to stay in a little hotel there, which we used at boat shows. Flew out the next morning from Heathrow to Rome, walked up the road, bag of tools, printed circuit boards, all the sort of bits and pieces. And another plane took me southwards and onto, it wasn't Augusta, it was a place right by, is it Vesuvius, whichever it is that's there, can't remember. And a taxi met me, took me to Augusta, 20 miles on the way, and about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the ship's agent turned up, put me on a wooden launch that looked as though it had been built with an ounce, and shunted me along the bay to something not quite as big as that, but it's quite a big ship. Nobody spoke any English. So I went up on the bridge, and nothing was switched on in our department. Switched the log on. Nothing happened whatsoever. The whole mechanism was dead. I thought, oh dear, we have got a problem. Put on overalls, dirty shoes, down to the engine room, bag of tools over your shoulder, bottom of the engine room, fixed the problem, and came back, saw the captain. He spoke a little bit of English. They dropped me off ashore, because they were anchored off at the time. Launch brought me back to Augusta, and then I got a bus to Palermo at the other end of Sicily, booked myself in a hotel for the night, flew back the next day to Milan, via Milan, because there weren't any flights back for several days to Heathrow. So I had to go to Milan, from there back to London, and there picked up the car and drove back to Birmingham. The only thing wrong with the switch was they hadn't switched the power on in the electronics. And I think you get a lot of things like that. I went to one of the Fleet Auxiliary tankers, which was in jib at the time, and our electromagnetic log was showing it travelling in 6 knots, and it was in dock. And they'd had a lot of problems with it, so I went on board. And the reason was that when the shipyard had installed it, and I have had logs connected to the steering gear, God knows why. Wiring on ships used to be very bad. You started off with a multi-core cable on the bridge, then it would change to colour coding, then somewhere else, before it got to the engine room, it would be back to numbering, and so on. And it was a wonder that the wires ever ended up where they should do. In that particular instance, they didn't. They were connected to the steering gear, I think. But you sort that sort of thing out. And I went to Jed, and there was this log misbehaving itself, because the shipyard had used an ancient cable, totally unsuitable for the job, to connect the sensing probe through the bottom. And every time a bit of electrics on the engine room area was switched on or off, it totally upset the log. And I just said to the captain, I said, I've nothing I can do. When you come back to the UK, when you get that wired correctly in accordance with the instructions, I'll come back and we'll go and do a trial, which we did off Portland. It was playing a force 8, but if you're on a large tanker, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't spill the gin and tonic. And everything was all right afterwards. But you get all sorts of silly situations like that. I mean, 1 or 2 of the landing craft that went out to the Falkland War, I did the trials on all those landing craft. And they were very, very lightly built. And one of them actually smashed the gate valve that let our prow through the bottom, it actually smashed because they're so lightly constructed so they can run up the beach that if you get really rough weather, they get thrown all over the place. Anyway, that's enough about that sort of thing, but I used to get both yachts, and the yachts were more interesting, obviously. What else have I got here? Oh, I did do one modest trip, the opposite of most of the ones that Doug does, where we fetched an Atalanta. It's a coal-moulded hull built by Fairies, and we went to fetch a second-hand one back from Den Briel, I think, at the back behind Rotterdam. I've never been so cold in my life. It was Easter, and it was before wetsuits and things like that. And we got stuck in absolutely dense fog or flushing. We had ships hooting all round us right through the night. We just stemmed the tide. And the compass, you had to give it a kick every so often because it had got a damaged pivot. And there was sludge in the petrol engine, and there was sludge in the petrol tank, so that didn't help. And we eventually got to Livington, and but during the night, just stuck there. A was worrying with all these ships hooting, and secondly, I think I had double of everything on in the way of clothing. We're nearly there, I think. How am I doing for time? Fleet auxiliaries I've talked about, that one. It came to pass more recently that I bought a Cornish crabber, 24th of boat. I always wanted my own boat. I never wanted children. I wanted a boat. So, having dealt with the first item, we did eventually move house and raise enough money to buy a Cornish crabber. I called it Polygata. Those of you who know Dylan Thomas will recognise that as the local lady of the streets, whatever you want to call her, from under Millwood. And I thought it had to be a girl's name for a boat with gaff rig and mast, topsail, all that sort of thing. And I sailed it up from Rocking, launched it at Rocking, Cornwall, sailed it up the Bristol Channel, and then locked in at Sharpness, where you've got about 10 knots pushing sideways. And I thought, how do we deal with this sort of thing? Because I didn't want to make a cock of it, obviously my nice, new, beautiful boat. And under power, I aimed for the downstream pier and got into the lock before we hit the upstream pier with the tide flooding. I did it several times. I used to sail it single-handed through the night and that sort of thing. But I never wore a life jacket. I hate life jackets, but I did chain myself on very, very securely because I didn't want to see it disappearing in the sunset. I was asked to go to Palma to Juan Carlos's power boat. Now that was an interesting boat. He's still around. He's given up being king of Spain, hasn't he? But I was hoping to get a trip on it. It didn't come to pass, but what a nice boat. It had 2,500 horse diesels turning props up tubes at the back, one each side, squirting jets of water out of the back. And that would take it to 25 knots or thereabouts. And I was there to fit an electromagnetic log to the hull so that you could feed speed into the very early satellite navigators. And if you really wanted to motor, in the middle was a gas turbine. And that pushed another jet of water out, and you could get up to over 50 knots. I didn't get a chance to go to sea, but I would love to have done it. On the same sort of thing, I oversaw the fitting of an electromagnetic log to the powerboat Virgin Atlantic Challenger. And I was promised a trip on that, but I think it got chartered or something. But that was the same sort of thing in a different way. We do about 50 odd knots. And I sort of covered the electronics with silicone rubber to make it all set and be vibration resistant. And I again had a nice letter. It worked all the way back across the... I had a letter from Dag Pike, another name from the past. Everything I did is in the past, isn't it?
It's true for a lot of us.
And then, just briefly, I'm not going to go into any detail on satellite navigation, because A, it will send you all to sleep, but the transit system was the first of the satellite navigation. That was its formal name. And the American government made the technology available for not only for commercial shipping, but also for anybody to use. And what was interesting, I've got one or two slides here. Well, there's my boat. I jumped over the side in the middle of the Bristol Channel and said to my friend, please take some pictures, and which he did. And there was a crease in the main. Oh, hang on, didn't mean to do that. There was a big crease in the mainsail. I haven't got the gaff quite the right angle, but I couldn't do it just that and take pictures. And I got over the side in a rubber duck. It's about 7 miles out in the Bristol Channel. That, in the dim and distant there, is the Steel Company of Wales. And we were out by that scull with a lightship. Anyway, I got some pictures, because it's quite difficult to get pictures of your own boat, isn't it? Eventually I sold it. I used to keep it up Tewkesbury, and then I used to lock out from the Avon into the Severn at Tewkesbury. You do a mile or a mile and a half to lock again, then you motor it, having taken the mast down, you then motor down to Gloucester, you lock in there, 18 bridges are swung by hand for you when you blast your horn, and that takes you to Sharpness, and then they open the lock gates there on high water, and you've got the second highest tide in the world next to the Bay of Fundy in eastern Canada, and about 42 feet on springs, rise and fall. And when you've got to go, you've got to go. And transits on the English and Welsh sides, and you go through an enormous pack of stones, which are at an angle to the geometry of the estuary, and it's called the chutes. I think they got the vowels wrong. Because you really have to do it. You have to get everything, and coming upstream, of course, back up after my swinging, being on a swinging board in Mumbles. Then we come to a point, I think, I put it in, no, I'll do it there. The first satellite navigation system was designed for American submarines to, during the Cold War, to be able to surface, fix their position and dive again and revert to inertia navigation and traditional methods. And that was the system. What was interesting about it, that incidentally is a shrimper. When I sold the boat, unfortunately, I bought a shrimper, and that's at Tewkesbury, and it was gusting 7. I've got a reef in, and you... I ought to have worked this one. You can just about see this bit of the centreboard just there. But they were beautiful little boats to say. I spent one Christmas. That didn't endear me to the family, because one of the things I learned to do when I first went on ships was to learn to arc weld. I did a year's course of arc welding, and I used to make my own stainless boat fittings. I built several trailers, including spending Christmas